Behind the squeaky-clean facade of television's most manufactured boy band lurked a world of bizarre auditions, legendary feuds, future rock gods, accidental fortunes, and one very famous mother's invention. From rejected rock icons to psychedelic car destruction, these little-known facts reveal the Monkees were far stranger than anyone imagined. Fact 1. Stephen Stills was rejected for bad teeth. When producers Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider placed their now-famous casting call in September of 1965, they were looking for 4 young men to star in their new television series about a struggling rock band. Over 400 hopefuls showed up to audition, and among them was a talented 20-year-old musician named Stephen Stills, who had just moved to Los Angeles from New York City. Stills was already a skilled guitarist and songwriter who had been cutting his teeth in the Greenwich Village folk scene, and he certainly had the musical chops to be part of any band. But when it came time for the producers to make their final decisions, Stills didn't make the cut, and the reason had nothing to do with his musical ability. According to multiple sources, the producers rejected him because they felt his appearance wasn't quite right for television. Specifically, they thought his receding hairline and crooked teeth weren't photogenic enough for a show aimed at teenage audiences who wanted to see fresh-faced heartthrobs on their screens every week. It must have stung at the time, but Stills took the rejection in stride. Before leaving his audition, he actually recommended his friend Peter Tork for the role, telling the producers that Tork had a similar folk musician vibe and what they described as an open Nordic look. Tork got the job and became one of the 4 Monkees, while Stills went on to form Buffalo Springfield and later joined Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, becoming one of the most respected musicians of his generation. The irony is that if Stills had been cast in the Monkees, the entire landscape of 1960s and 70s rock music might have been completely different. Fact 2. The pilot had record low test scores. The Monkees came dangerously close to never making it to television at all, and the reason was their disastrous pilot episode. In the early 1960s, television networks were just beginning to pioneer the use of audience testing, where they would show pilot episodes to test groups and measure their reactions to determine whether a show was worth picking up for a full season. When producers Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider shot their pilot episode for the Monkees in San Diego and Los Angeles, they did so on an extremely tight budget, and in many scenes the 4 cast members were actually wearing their own clothes because the production couldn't afford proper costumes. The pilot was then shown to test audiences, and the results were absolutely devastating. According to reports, the pilot set a new record at the time for the lowest audience response scores ever recorded for a television pilot, which should have been the death sentence for the entire project. But Rafelson refused to give up on the show and decided to take a different approach. He went back and re-edited the pilot, this time including footage from the original screen tests of the 4 Monkees so that viewers could get to know the band members better and understand their individual personalities before the story even began. The re-edited version was tested again with a new audience, and this time the response was so overwhelmingly positive that NBC immediately placed an order not just for 1 season, but for 2 full seasons of episodes. The recut pilot eventually aired on November 14, 1966 as the 10th episode of the first season, and by that point, the Monkees had already become a massive hit with audiences across America. Fact 3. Mike Nesmith's mother invented liquid paper. Long before Mike Nesmith became famous as one of the Monkees, his mother, Betty Nesmith. Graham was struggling to make ends meet as a single mother, working as a secretary in Dallas, Texas. In 1951, she landed a job as an executive secretary for the chairman of the board at Texas Bank and Trust, where she worked with one of the new electric typewriters that were becoming popular in offices across America. The problem with these electric typewriters was that they were incredibly sensitive, making it very easy to make typing mistakes. And when you made an error, there was no good way to fix it without having to start the entire page over from scratch. Betta had a background in art and painting, and one day she realized that painters never had this problem because they could simply paint over their mistakes and start fresh. She began experimenting in her kitchen, using her blender to mix up batches of white tempera paint that could cover typing errors, and she started bringing small bottles of this correction fluid to work to fix her own mistakes. Her co-workers immediately saw how useful it was and started asking for their own bottles, so Betty began producing it on the side and eventually called it liquid paper. The business grew slowly at first, and young Mike and his friends would help fill bottles in their kitchen to keep up with orders. By 1979, liquid paper had become a massive success, and Bet sold the company to Gillette Corporation for $47.5 million. When she passed away just 6 months later in 1980, Mike Nesmith inherited half of her estate, which was worth over $50 million. Fact 4. They used Three Stooges props. When the Monkees television series went into production in 1966, the show was filmed at the Columbia Pictures studio lot in Hollywood, and the production team found a creative way to save money by making use of resources that were already available on the lot. Columbia Pictures had been the home studio for the Three Stooges, who had filmed hundreds of comedy short films there over the years, and by the time the Monkees came along, there were warehouses full of old sets, furniture, and props that had been used in those classic slapstick comedies. Rather than building everything from scratch or spending money on new items, the producers of the Monkees decided to recycle many of these existing pieces for their own show. This meant that if you were watching the Monkees in the late 1960s, you might have noticed certain props or set pieces that looked strangely familiar if you had grown up watching the Three Stooges. One particularly memorable example was a pair of pajamas with a bunny design that appeared on the Monkees, which had originally been worn in one of the Three Stooges shorts. The reuse of these props created an unintentional connection between two completely different comedy shows from different eras, linking the physical comedy antics of Larry, Moe, and Curly with the musical adventures of Micky, Davy, Mike, and Peter. It was a practical decision driven by budget concerns, but it also meant that the Monkees and the Three Stooges shared more than just a studio lot. They actually shared pieces of their on-screen worlds, creating a strange bit of television history that most viewers never noticed at the time. Fact 5. Davy Jones shared the stage with the Beatles' TV debut. 2 years before Davy Jones became a teen idol, as the lead singer of the Monkees, he had already crossed paths with the Beatles in one of the most significant moments in television history. On February 9, 1964, The Ed Sullivan Show aired what would become one of the most watched and most talked about episodes in the history of American television, as the Beatles made their legendary debut performance in front of 73 million viewers across the country. What most people don't realize is that Davy Jones was also on that exact same episode, performing alongside the cast of the hit Broadway musical Oliver, in which he played the role of the Artful Dodger. Jones was only 18 years old at the time, and his performance with the Oliver cast included singing the song "I'd Do Anything" with the other cast members. While the Beatles were creating absolute pandemonium with screaming fans and launching what would become known as the British Invasion, young Davy Jones was waiting backstage and watching the chaos unfold from the side of the stage. Years later, Jones recalled that experience and said he watched the Beatles perform and saw the girls in the audience going absolutely crazy. And in that moment, he thought to himself that this was exactly what he wanted, that he wanted a piece of that same kind of excitement and fame. Just 2 years later, Jones would get his wish when he was cast in the Monkees, and by 1967, his band would actually outsell the Beatles in record sales, making that night on The Ed Sullivan Show an eerie foreshadowing of his own future success. Fact 6. Mike Nesmith punched a wall over Don Kirshner. By early 1967, tensions between the Monkees and their music supervisor, Don Kirshner, had reached a breaking point over the issue of creative control. Kirshner had been hired to oversee the music for the show and had brought in professional studio musicians to record the instrumental tracks for the Monkees songs, which meant that Mike Nesmith and Peter Tork, who were both accomplished musicians in their own right, weren't being allowed to play their own instruments on the records. The situation came to a head when Kirshner presented the Monkees with their second album, More of the Monkees, in January of 1967, without giving them any input into which songs would be included or how the album would be packaged. This was the last straw for the band members, particularly for Nesmith, who was the most outspoken about wanting artistic freedom. During a confrontation at a Beverly Hills hotel, Kirshner and his attorney met with the Monkees and essentially told them to stop complaining and just cash their checks, which was absolutely the wrong thing to say to Mike Nesmith. According to Micky Dolenz, who was present at the meeting, Nesmith became so angry that he punched his fist straight through the hotel room wall and then turned to Kirshner and said, "This could have been your face." The incident made it clear that the band was willing to fight for control over their own music, and the standoff ultimately led to the producers siding with their stars who couldn't be easily replaced. About a month later, Kirshner was fired from the project for violating the terms of his contract, and the Monkees finally gained the autonomy to record their own music. Fact 7. Jimi Hendrix opened for them disastrously. In the summer of 1967, one of the strangest pairings in rock and roll history took place when Jimi Hendrix and his band, The Experience, joined the Monkees on tour as their opening act. Micky Dolenz and Peter Tork had both attended the Monterey Pop Festival in June and witnessed Hendrix's legendary performance, and they were so impressed that they convinced their management to invite him to open for them on their upcoming American tour. The pairing seemed like it might work on paper, as the Monkees were trying to gain credibility as serious musicians, and Hendrix needed more exposure to American audiences. But in reality, it was a complete disaster from the very first show. The Monkees' audience consisted primarily of young teenage girls and their parents who had come to see their clean-cut television idols, and they had absolutely no idea what to make of Hendrix's wild psychedelic guitar playing and provocative stage presence. According to Dolenz, Hendrix would walk out on stage, fire up his amplifiers, and break into purple haze, and the kids in the audience would immediately start drowning him out by screaming, "We want Davy," over and over again. The situation was incredibly embarrassing for everyone involved, and after just 7 shows over 8 days, Hendrix had finally had enough. On July 17, 1967, during a performance at Forest Hills Tennis Stadium in New York, Hendrix reportedly flipped off the crowd with his middle finger, threw down his guitar, and walked off the stage without finishing his set, ending his brief and uncomfortable stint as the Monkees' opening act. Fact 8. Episodes often ran short. During the production of the Monkees television series, the writers and directors frequently ran into an unusual problem that became a recurring issue throughout the show's run. Many of the episodes would finish filming and then come up short when it was time to edit them together, meaning they didn't have enough footage to fill the full 30-minute time slot that the network required for each episode. This was a significant problem because television shows needed to hit their exact runtime to fit into the programming schedule along with the commercial breaks, and coming up even a minute or two short could throw off the entire broadcast. Rather than going back and reshooting entire scenes or adding new story elements to pad out the episodes, producer Bob Rafelson came up with a creative and much simpler solution to fill the time. He decided to film quick, candid interviews with the 4 Monkees backstage, where they would talk directly to the camera about whatever was on their minds or discuss the episode that viewers had just watched. These interview segments were usually about 1 minute long, just enough to bring the episode up to the required length, and they became such a regular occurrence that it turned into a running joke among the cast and crew. The phrase "we're a minute short" became a familiar refrain on set, and everyone knew it meant it was time to grab the 4 band members and film another one of these spontaneous interview segments. One particular episode, called Find the Monkees, actually needed more than the usual amount of extra time, so the interview at the end of that episode ran for 3 full minutes instead of just 1, during which the Monkees discussed the recent Sunset Strip riots that had been happening in Los Angeles. Fact 9. Jack Nicholson co-wrote their movie Head. After the Monkees television series was canceled in 1968, the band decided to make a feature film that would completely break away from their squeaky-clean TV image and show a much darker, more experimental side of their creativity. The movie that resulted was called Head. and it was co-written and produced by none other than Jack Nicholson, who at the time was still a relatively unknown actor and screenwriter trying to make a name for himself in Hollywood. The origins of the screenplay came from a weekend retreat to a resort in Ojai, California, where the Monkees, along with producers Bob Rafelson and Bert Oz, Schneider and Jack Nicholson, spent several days brainstorming ideas for the film. According to various accounts, the group spent the weekend talking into a tape recorder about what they wanted the movie to be, and there was reportedly a significant amount of marijuana being consumed during these creative sessions. Nicholson then took all of those recorded conversations and used them as the basis for writing the actual screenplay, and according to Rafelson himself, the director structured the script while he was under the influence of LSD. The result was a bizarre, psychedelic stream-of-consciousness film that featured surreal sequences, celebrity cameos, and a complete deconstruction of the Monkees' manufactured image. The movie included appearances from Frank Zappa, Annette Funicello, boxer Sonny Liston, and even Nicholson himself in a brief role. Head turned out to be a massive commercial failure when it was released, but it has since gained a cult following and is now considered an interesting piece of experimental cinema from the late 1960s. Fact 10. The film Head made only $16,000. When the Monkees' experimental film Head was released in November of 1968, it turned out to be one of the most spectacular box office disasters of the entire decade. Columbia Pictures had invested $790,000 into the production, which was a substantial budget for the time, and everyone involved had high hopes that the film would showcase the Monkees as serious artists and help them transition away from their teeny-bopper image. However, the movie was an absolute commercial catastrophe from the moment it hit theaters. According to reports, Head managed to recoup only about $16,000 during its theatrical run, which meant that Columbia Pictures lost nearly all of their investment, and the film Chuan became one of the biggest flops of the era. There were several reasons why the movie failed so dramatically at the box office. First, the film was promoted with a mysterious advertising campaign that never actually mentioned the Monkees by name, which meant that their core fan base of young teenage girls had no idea the movie even existed or that it starred their favorite band. Second, even if those fans had known about the film and gone to see it, they would have been completely bewildered by what they saw on screen, because Head was a dark, cynical, psychedelic journey through surreal imagery and bitter commentary about the music industry, which was the complete opposite of the light-hearted, family-friendly comedy show they were used to watching every week. The older, hipper audience that might have appreciated the film's experimental nature refused to see it because they dismissed the Monkees as a manufactured pop group, so Head ended up appealing to almost no one and losing a fortune in the process. Fact 11. Frank Zappa loved the Monkees. One of the most surprising celebrity fans of the Monkees was Frank Zappa, the avant-garde rock musician and leader of the Mothers of Invention, who was known for his experimental music and his aggressive stance against anything commercial or mainstream. Despite being the ultimate countercultural figure who seemed to represent everything the Monkees were not, Zappa was actually a genuine supporter of the band and made several public statements praising their work. In one particularly shocking quote, Zappa said that he thought the Beatles were just a good commercial group and that he actually preferred the Monkees, which was an incredibly bold statement considering that most music critics at the time viewed the Beatles as untouchable gods of rock and roll. Zappa's support for the Monkees went beyond just words, and he actually appeared on their television show in March of 1968 in an episode called The Monkees Blow Their Minds. During his appearance, Zappa participated in a bizarre sketch where he and Mike Nesmith switched identities, with Zappa dressing up in Nesmith's signature green wool hat and 8-button monkey shirt while Nesmith wore a curly wig and fake nose to look like Zappa. The two then interviewed each other while playing their opposite roles, creating a surreal and self-aware comedy bit that was quite ahead of its time. Later in the same episode, Zappa demonstrated how to play a car as if it were a musical instrument by taking a golden sledgehammer and smashing the vehicle to pieces while one of his songs played in the background, turning automotive destruction into a form of performance art that perfectly captured the absurdist spirit of both artists. Fact 12. They outsold the Beatles and Stones combined. During 1967, which was the year that the Beatles released their groundbreaking album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and the Rolling Stones put out their Satanic Majesty's Request, something absolutely remarkable happened in the world of record sales that shocked the entire music industry. The Monkees, who were often dismissed by critics as nothing more than a manufactured television band created to cash in on Beatlemania, actually outsold both the Beatles and the Rolling Stones combined during that year, making them the biggest-selling musical act in the world at that particular moment in time. This incredible achievement came at the absolute peak of Monkee Mania, when the band's television show was dominating the ratings. Their singles were constantly climbing to the top of the charts, and their albums were flying off the shelves faster than stores could keep them in stock. The success was driven by a perfect combination of factors, including the massive exposure they received from their weekly television show, the expertly crafted pop songs written by some of the best songwriters in the business, and the clever marketing strategy that tied together the TV show, the records, and countless pieces of merchandise into one unstoppable commercial juggernaut. While music purists and rock critics continued to look down on the Monkees as a fake band that didn't deserve to be mentioned in the same breath as the Beatles or the Stones, the actual sales numbers told a completely different story, proving that millions of fans around the world were buying their records and making the Monkees one of the most financially successful acts of the entire 1960s. Fact 13. The Charles Manson audition is a hoax. For decades, one of the most persistent and darkly fascinating urban legends in rock and roll history has been the story that Charles Manson, the infamous cult leader and murderer, once auditioned to be a member of the Monkees before being rejected. The story seemed plausible enough because Manson had indeed been hanging around the fringes of the Los Angeles music scene in the late 1960s, and the legend fit nicely alongside the true stories of other famous musicians like Stephen Stills and Paul Williams, who had auditioned for the band but didn't make the cut. However, the entire Charles Manson audition story is completely false, and we actually know exactly where it came from. In December of 2014, Micky Dolenz revealed during an appearance on a podcast that he had made up the story himself years earlier as a joke during a radio interview, where he said everybody auditioned for the Monkees, Stephen Stills, Paul Williams, and Charlie Manson. And his deadpan delivery was so convincing that people took it as gospel truth, and the story spread like wildfire. To make matters even more confusing, Davy Jones had also claimed in 1999 that he was the one who started the rumor as a joke. So there's actually some dispute over which Monkee deserves credit for creating this particular piece of rock mythology. The story is not only false, but actually impossible, because Charles Manson was incarcerated from 1961 to 1967 for various charges, including violating his probation, which means he was literally in prison during the 1965 auditions and couldn't have been there even if he wanted to be. Fact 14. Micky Dolenz had never played drums. When Micky Dolenz was cast as the drummer for the Monkees, there was one small problem that nobody had really thought through during the audition process. He had absolutely no idea how to play the drums and had never sat behind a drum kit in his entire life. Dolenz had been hired primarily because he was an experienced actor who had starred in a children's television show called Circus Boy when he was younger, and he had a natural charisma and comedic timing that made him perfect for the wacky, energetic character they wanted on the show. The producers knew that Mike Nesmith and Peter Tork were both legitimate musicians who could play guitar and other instruments, but they needed someone to be the drummer, and they simply assigned that role to Dolenz without considering whether he actually had the skills to pull it off. Once production on the television series began in early 1966, Dolenz found himself in the awkward position of having to learn how to play the drums while simultaneously filming episodes of the show and recording songs in the studio, all on an incredibly tight schedule that didn't leave much room for practice or mistakes. He had to take crash courses in drumming, and work with instructors to teach him the basics of keeping rhythm and coordinating his hands and feet, all while pretending on camera that he was already a skilled musician who had been playing for years. The situation was made somewhat easier by the fact that professional studio musicians were playing the actual instrumental tracks on the early Monkees records, so Dolenz only needed to provide vocals and look convincing when he was shown playing drums on the television show. Fact 15. The show dropped its laugh track mid-run. During the first season of the Monkees, the show followed the standard television convention of the 1960s by including a laugh track, which was pre-recorded audience laughter that was added to the soundtrack to tell viewers when something funny had happened and when they were supposed to laugh along. Laugh tracks were considered absolutely essential for sitcoms during this era, and nearly every comedy show on television used them because network executives believed that audiences needed this audio cue to know when jokes were being made. However, as the Monkees moved into their second season, the producers made the bold and highly unusual decision to completely eliminate the laugh track from the show, starting with an episode called Hitting the High Seas. This was an extremely rare move for a 1960s sitcom, as most shows continued using laugh tracks throughout their entire runs, and very few programs were willing to take the risk of removing this familiar element that audiences had come to expect. The decision to drop the laugh track reflected the show's evolution toward a more experimental and less conventional style of comedy, as the second season episodes became increasingly surreal and psychedelic, incorporating more avant-garde humor and breaking the fourth wall in ways that didn't fit with the traditional sitcom format. There were a couple of exceptions to this new policy, as two later episodes called The Monkees Watch Their Feet and the Devil and Peter Tork still included laugh tracks, because they had been produced before the official decision to eliminate canned laughter went into effect. But the vast majority of second season episodes aired without any artificial audience reactions.